NASSCOM. Ms. Ghosh, thank you very much for joining us. For the moment, what do you think is the Indian industry's vulnerability when it comes to artificial intelligence?
I don't see vulnerability when it comes to artificial intelligence. I see tremendous amount of increasing awareness. I see tremendous amount of intent, and I see a hunger to ensure that we get this right. So I don't see vulnerability. I think the time is now that we need to really get into the game and start figuring out how to drive effective adoption. And what we've called out in the report is what can government as well as industry do to ensure that we can accelerate that pace of adoption. And that's the key focus of the roadmap. If you look at the AI for Viksit Bharat roadmap, which looks at how we can unlock AI for accelerated economic growth, what we've really called out in our recommendations are specific actions that is needed today to ensure we carve out the pathways to accelerated adoption.
Right. Now, you've mentioned at least 4 or 5 different sectors in your report which can benefit from artificial intelligence. Now, what are some of the targeted policy interventions that may be needed from the government side? Around 5 to 6 years ago, we had seen PLI reform. So what kind of reform or intervention is needed today when we're on the cusp of taking full advantage of the AI revolution?
Sure. So let me step back, just a little bit. So if you see the report, the recommendations come in 2 parts. There are 2 levers that we are talking about, right? If you look at current growth rates, we are going to be around 6.6 to 7 trillion in the next 10 years by 2035. If we have to get to that 8% growth rate, we need to cross 8 trillion. And that's the gap that we are looking at, the roughly around 1 to 1.5 trillion gap that exists. How can technology, especially AI, help bridge that gap, and where can it most effectively drive accelerated growth, right? So the first lever we have looked at is just increased productivity. Just getting AI integrated into different industries, into different sectors, end to end, to drive increased productivity. We have actually, with McKinsey, looked at around 850 occupations across nearly 16 sectors, nearly over 2,000 distinct work activities to identify what should be the priority sectors or the priority activities for India. And the 2 that we have called out in this report specifically are banking as well as manufacturing and pharma. Right? So these are the ones we've called out, which we believe that if we can get this right, that will contribute to around 500 to 600 billion incremental GDP for the country. Now, the main factor here is you cannot have a one size that fits all. You cannot say that we'll do generic policy changes that will drive adoption. Each sector needs a unique approach. And that's the main recommendation from the report to unlock productivity, that we need to have a sectoral approach, right? And in each sector, we have called out not just what needs to be done in terms of data, in terms of policies, etc., but also the risks. So the report calls out both what enablers as well as the risks. The second lever we've talked about is unlocking innovation. And here again, we've looked at around 18 arenas. McKinsey comes out with these arenas, and we studied this with an India lens to understand the opportunities for India. And the 2 huge opportunities that stand out is drug development, moving from generic pharma to novel drug discovery and development. And the second one is software-defined automotive manufacturing. And I think both are significant opportunities where we have a very strong ecosystem in place already. We have the ecosystem, we have the capabilities. What we have to do is now invest in the R&D to leapfrog. So these were the 2 things that we identified. And again, for each of these, we've called out sectoral enablers that will be needed to unlock the full potential of AI.
Ms. Ghosh, if I start with manufacturing, for example, now increasing the share of manufacturing in our GDP, that has been the focus of the government. So what is a sector-specific intervention that can come from the government? Can it be monetary support or it would be non-monetary intervention?
Most of it is non-monetary. See, it's really about building the infrastructure. For example, in AI, one of the critical requirements is data, access to data. And India is the data capital when it comes to generation. We generate tons and tons of data. But we haven't been very good in leveraging this data for innovation and AI adoption. And that's one of the things that India AI mission is now trying to fix. The AI Kosh, data Kosh, which has been developed under the India AI mission, is to do this. And we need to go faster and do much more. In manufacturing or any sector, one of the first things you have to look at is how do you make the anonymized data available to the industry? Creating a marketplace. So one is making data available. Two, in order to help industry go through, for example, where do they get stuck? Testing. Testing becomes a huge bottleneck. So how do you create shared infrastructure for some of these processes like testing, which will tremendously help the industry leapfrog? How do you create clusters? In manufacturing, again, if you pick certain areas, how do you create clusters that ties industry to talent, to innovators? Going back to what we did in the good old days for tech services, I think that's a great formula and that can be now upgraded and repeated for several of these sectors. So these are some of the sector-specific recommendations that we have called out, and there's a lot more in the report.
Right. What do you think is the opportunity to increase employment or create more skilled jobs? Because there is a worry as well that AI will lead to job cuts in the market. What is your view and finding after carrying out this detailed analysis and study with the help of many stakeholders?
So the jobs report or insight is expected to come out in a few weeks. So you'll need to stay tuned for that. But in this specific report, as we looked at how to unlock the potential for both lever 1 and lever 2, we realized that one of the biggest risks is job displacements. And this is across industry, right? But there's also tremendous amount of new roles and new jobs, new tasks that are getting created. And there has to be significant focus on upskilling and reskilling so that the people who are getting displaced can now be redeployed in these new tasks and new roles. If we can do that, net, India will emerge as a job creator, and that's where you're getting the value of AI. That's where you're getting the ROI, as we call it, from your AI investments, rather than sort of a negative impact because of the job displacements. But if you permit, I will not speak on that too much right now because we're launching a very detailed report on the impact of jobs, especially in the tech sector, in just a few weeks. And I'm happy to talk to you after that and get into much more details.
Right. My final question to you would be, what is the expectation from the industry now as to what they should do in terms of deploying more AI tools? And one thing that we can expect from the government now in terms of putting in place the right policy framework and tools to encourage AI adoption from the ground up, not just in the top companies listed in the stock market, but from MSMEs and upwards.
A very good question. See, government, there are 4 things that government will have to do. One, work with the regulators, etc., sectoral regulators, sectoral bodies, to ensure that we are building very targeted AI adoption playbooks by core sectors. We cannot have a generic strategy that plays across. That's just not possible. That's just not impactful. So we have to prioritize the sectors that we want to go after, which is what we have called out in the report. And once we've prioritized the sectors, then working with the right sectoral bodies to ensure that we create targeted playbooks for each sector. I think that's the first job. That's very important. Second, unlock data. We have to unlock data, but we have to do it in a structured way so that we can use data as a competitive advantage for India. It's very, very important. In fact, we are saying that India has to become the biggest data marketplace for anonymized data in the world with the right guardrails so that we control our data and we are able to leverage our data for the maximum impact. Third, skilling. This is going to be critical because if we don't get this right, we are not going to get the positive impact of AI. Then if the job displacements go out of hand, we are going to lose control of AI. So we will have to ensure that skilling happens ahead of the curve and it enables us stay in control and ensure that our investments in AI are resulting in positive returns. And last but not the least is just, the regulatory support that is needed to drive the transformation of industries, because in the AI world, you have to be tremendously agile. You have to change business models. You have to think end-to-end reimagination of your business models. So this is where a lot of the ease of doing business policies can come into play. So these are the 4 areas we have identified for government. And as far as industry is concerned, it's really having an end-to-end understanding of what AI will do for you. It's not that Indian industries are not deploying AI. If you look at banks, there's so much going on. But unfortunately today, most of the institutions, whether it's banks or manufacturing companies, are treating they're treating AI in silos. There are pilots here, pilots there, and it's a sort of fragmented silos that's going on. And that we believe that approach is not going to pay off in the long run. You have to have an end-to-end approach. You have to pretty much reimagine your end-to-end business model and your business process and say, what's the role of AI in doing this? What problem do I want to solve? What's the biggest problem do I want to solve? And then build out the strategy, which is, again, has to be top-down, board-driven, CEO-driven. It has to be top-down driven and not something that the IT department alone does. And it has to get integrated into the culture of the industry. So I really think for industry, it's now time to realize this is a company-wide or organization-wide transformation. This requires new culture almost. And this has to be led from the very top.
Thank you so much, Ms. Debjani Ghosh, for joining us for that very important conversation on India's artificial intelligence journey and how it is absolutely incumbent on the leadership of every organization to make sure that all those AI tools are being deployed for bringing solutions to customers and the workplace as well. That's all we have time.